Thank you for joining us today. This is Peninsula 24.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump and his transition team have focused on settling on the cabinet members until Trump's inauguration on January 20th next year. Trump has unveiled concrete plans on various domestic issues, including job creation for American workers, but he hasn't announced any detailed plans regarding foreign policies towards Pyongyang. All eyes are now on Trump's appointments in the national security area and its expected impact on Washington's foreign policy toward the Korean Peninsula. On today's Peninsula 24, we take an in-depth look at Trump's selection of his cabinet members and necessary diplomatic and security measures for the Korean Peninsula as well.
For today's discussion, we are joined by distinguished Professor Choi Young-jin from Yonsei University.
How are you?
Who is also a former Korean ambassador to the US. And Mr. Kim Young-joon, managing partner of international law firm Milbank, who is also a renowned expert in the US foreign policy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here today. Personnel appointment of a government can impose a significant impact on various issues facing inside and outside of the country. And composition of the new US government will also have a critical effect on the Korean Peninsula. Ambassador Choi, Donald Trump is in the process of choosing his cabinet members, and he has shown unprecedented moves during the selection process. What has been the biggest issue in Trump's cabinet picks?
Donald Trump succeeded in election as a businessman. Now, as a president-elect, beginning January, he will become global leader. He must make a transition from businessman to global leader. That involves personal choice about himself. Then he must choose those who will accompany him in making him global leader. And that is one transition he has to go through. The other one is he will have difficulty in choosing cabinet members because of hearing in the Congress. Those are two difficulties he must go through.
Okay. Mr. Kim, Trump has named his family member to the White House transition team. What kind of role will they play, and what can you expect to see from them?
I think regardless of any formal position the family members may have, they will always be in the background, particularly in the Trump family business context. But in the case of Trump himself, as Ambassador Choi mentioned, he lacks the foreign policy experience, so he will have to rely on true experts on those areas. But speaking to his style, the most important factor will be sort of keeping internal tensions for maximizing loyalty to himself. So that's something that'll make it very difficult to predict what sort of foreign policy actions he will take, because it's really ultimately about him rather than a particular policy preferences, which is a sort of running theme for his administration.
Okay. Mr. Kim, considering the Trump's picks for his cabinet, most of the cabinet members are white men, only except for only a few non-white and female appointees. And most of the cabinet members are gazillionaires. Trump has actually received strong support from the white working class voters during the election. So opinions have been divided on the Trump's selection of his cabinet members. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so-called white male blue-collar workers helped him get elected, but you have to remember there aren't 60 million of them. It's really sort of a decisive margin. They were very crucial, but it's not all of the supporters were so-called white blue-collar workers. So it is inevitable that ultimate government makeup will not be reflective of just that part of the constituency. For example, there was a documentary by BBC last week after the election interviewing a bunch of West Virginia mining families, and they made it very clear, given how things are going, it's not clear that their so-called coal assistance will be coming through. So it is kind of inevitable, and Trump makes a big deal of drain the swamp, but maybe it's inevitable you have to get some people with some experience, probably people from another swamp, rather than drain the swamp completely.
Okay. Would you like to share your take on these same questions?
Yes, I think it's natural for Trump to pick rightist people in his cabinet and his colleagues because the platform he shared with American public during election was based on rightist tendencies. So it's only natural. When it comes to the contents, when you look at his America First policy he announced in April and the Gettysburg Address announced in October, you will discern two components in Trump's policies. One is on immigration and terrorism. The other one is protectionism and isolationism. And these two fronts, Trump will pursue with rightist tendencies. And those who are elected, of course, they are very keen on immigration and terrorism. It's only natural for him to do that. He may succeed on this because self-preservation is more important than human rights. And this problem, terrorism, immigration problem, is shared by all Western countries, like in Europe. So he may succeed. On the other hand, protectionism and isolationism as a global leader is a self-defeating strategy. I don't think Trump will succeed on this point. So he must be very careful in make an amalgam of these two fronts executioner in his Trump team for next 4 years.
Okay. Ambassador Choi, you already mentioned about the right-wing tendency of the possible cabinet composition of the Trump the administration. Some people also have raised concerns over the Trump's far-right cabinet appointees, even mentioning in connection with the ultra-right, that means a group of right-wing ideologies. Why is that, and how is the response from Trump on such argument in the US?
Trump has been elected on the platform which insisted on anti-establishment, represented by Hillary Clinton. What is the essence of anti-establishment? That is, in a way, denying the political correctness, such as putting too much emphasis on human rights, humanitarian assistance, and against the human rights components, Trump and his team will focus on self-protection and fight on anti-terrorism. From that sense, those who are in the establishment will certainly criticize Trump and his team because they will, in a way, neglect to a certain point human rights tendencies. But on the other hand, Trump team will focus on protectionism and the terrorism and their ultra tendencies against Islam terrorist group, certain including IS. So these two struggle between human rights and self-preservation. I tend to think that Trump will prevail. He will succeed in protecting American people and taking ultra position against international terrorism.
Okay. Mr. Kim, concerns might have risen over the composition of the Trump's cabinet. How's the response from the US as well as the outside of the world?
There are two levels. One, people mention with a sense of alarm the appointment of Stephen Bannon as the chief strategist at the White House. But he is well known as taking very extreme ultra-rightist view, some racist and sexist views. But in a way, Trump is an empty vessel. What I mean by that is Trump appointed Steve Bannon as chief strategist because he made Trump become the president in terms of getting the basic strategy and basically encouraging Trump that he can do it. And even the slogan, Make America Great, was actually suggested by Steve Bannon, taking cue from 1980 campaign from Reagan-Bush, with Make America Great Again was first floated. So it is almost irrelevant to Trump that Steve Bannon has extreme views, because he will do what he will do. So the racist tendencies of Steve Bannon is not directly relevant to how Trump himself will do. He will do what he thinks will make things work.
Okay.
But the second level is there's concern about over-militarization of the government. Too many generals in the cabinet. And for example, 1947 National Security Act was passed in the aftermath of the World War II, basically to prevent many generals, including marshals, 5-star generals. They were produced during the World War II, becoming too prominent in the U.S. government. And that's why when they instituted a requirement of congressional waiver for any retired general to become defense secretary, you need to be out of the military service for at least 7 years. And the first person, and so far the only person who was subject to that congressional waiver, was the famous General George C. Marshall, who was first Secretary of State, and then after 1 year hiatus became Secretary of Defense, and he had been out of the military service for about 5 years. So he was subjected to and was given the congressional waiver. So, for example, if Jim Massey, General Jim Massey of the Marines, is picked as Pentagon Secretary, then I don't think there'll be any difficulty in getting the congressional waiver, given the Republican control of the Congress. But it gives people a lot of pause, because American democracy is different from, say, other democracies like Turkey, Pakistan, and Thailand, where the military is a breath away from political interference. And it is very important for American democracy for the civilian to control the military. Okay. So there's that concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The number and portion of former generals in the Trump
particularly over the military and national security.
It is very critical point to understand tendency of the Trump administration. All right, Ambassador Choi, Korea has especially paid attention to the Trump appointments in the national security and diplomatic sectors. What are the key positions that are directly related to the security issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula? Who are the possible nominees, and what kind of roles will they play?
I think Trump himself and all the other colleagues he may choose as close advisors will support the most crucial element between countries, in other words, alliance between the US and Korea. There is no doubt about this. But when it comes to the business, that means which country will pay how much portion of the US troops stationed in Korea. There will be serious talks on this matter. And on this, I think our tendency has been to persuade, to appeal to American advisors, but beginning next president, we must have a philosophy and strategy. And in other words, alliance serves two countries. In other words, national interests of two countries make alliance possible. That is philosophy. From this philosophy, we have to advance what kind of strategy we have to perform. That is, two countries must share the station cost on Korean Peninsula. There must be division of the cost. In that perspective, if America advances too much, saying that, as Trump once said, you have to pay all the cost, otherwise we'll withdraw the troops. Against this, somebody must take out the philosophy and strategy, saying that in that case, American troops will be mercenaries. They are not serving the interest of the countries. Based on that, we can enter to negotiation with the Americans what can be the rightful share of the cost paid by two governments. So we have to have the strategy and philosophy rather than appealing simply to American counterpart persuasion and talk to behind the side think of our position. Such a kind of gesture will not help us very much with the Trump administration.
I see. Mr. Kim, White House National Security Advisor serves a role as a chief arbiter of virtually every major issues of security and diplomatic fields. And Michael Flynn, who will sit on the National Security Council with Trump, has expressed hardline views against Islamic State terrorism and North Korean issues. What is your take on this?
Yes, as Ambassador Choi mentioned, it is inevitable the people Trump will pick will be consistent with his views during the campaign in terms of basic rhetoric that resonated with the electorate. Having said that, General Michael Flynn, you have to remember, was considered a capable general. But once he was in charge of DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, he was basically fired because of terrible temperament and really messed up the administration of DIA. That's his general considered view. So he has a bit of an axe to grind in terms of democratic administration. National security advisor is a very important person for any president. You had Kissinger for Nixon, you had Condi Rice and Stephen Hadley for George W. Bush. And because whenever a crisis happens, the first person the president would consult is the National Security Advisor as opposed to Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. And so there will have to be some tempering of temperature, so to speak, whenever a crisis happens. I think, but overall, in terms of a tone of the relationship, particularly Korea and U.S. alliance, as Ambassador Chen mentioned, I don't expect any shift in terms of the mutually acknowledged importance of the alliance itself. There will be disagreements as to who does what, how to do things, but in terms of basic necessity and desirability of the alliance, I don't think there'll be any change. The real test for the National Security Advisor and the President will be coming not in the ordinary course, but when unexpected crisis happens, how would they deal with it? That's where the world has to watch how that will be dealt with with the new team.
Okay.
On Michael Flynn, I tend to agree what has been said. Mr. Kim had a bad temper. He was appointed 2012 by Obama as head of DIA, but he was sort of fired 2 years later, 2014. And there is another aspect of Michael Flynn's temperament, which is he was very clear in what he wants. When he analyzed the situation in Syria, he criticized the bulk of opinion prevailing in the DIA, saying that they supported the insurgency against Assad. But he said in this insurgency there is a lot of IS members, which was a minority view. But that point, I think, was taken up by Trump. I need somebody who has a strong view, even though it urged other people to criticize him, but I need this kind of person to prevail my position against terrorism. But I think on that score, Michael Flynn can play a important role in realizing what Trump advised during the campaign. I will take a clear action against terrorism.
There's been different sizes of argument during the process of choosing the president-elect's pick, the Secretary of State. What kind of foreign policy will the newly appointed U.S. Secretary of State promoted toward North Korea?
I think the most important point in Trump's mind while you want to choose a Secretary of State may not be North Korea. His main problem is anti-terrorism and overextension of American troops over the world. Those were the main point. Trump will select, in his calculation, to select his Secretary of State. On North Korea, we'll have a situation to talk about this. Whoever will become the Secretary of State, he'll have a terrible problem. Because unlike Iran case, there is a solution in sight. In other words, you impose sanctions on Iran. At the same time, you propose dialogue, and that is a combination, sanction and dialogue, which find a solution in there. On North Korea, there is not clear solution in sight. People say that North Korean question is the situation is lousy options. There is no clear point there. On top of that, there is a consensus in America among think tank, Congress, administration, a consensus which is that as long as North Korea does not make strategic decision, there will not be dialogue, which will not fly because North Korea is not likely to make a strategic decision because North Korea is unable to make such a decision. So they are stuck. If North Korea can make strategic decision, that is the right approach. But we have to think philosophically the question of North Korea. We have to accept that North Korea is unable to make a strategic decision. How to deal with this problem? So given the consensus prevailing in Washington, next Secretary of State will have huge problem regarding North Korea. And I think the solution must come from us, our next president, not from US Secretary of State or even Donald Trump. They don't have the conceptual solution to that problem.
Okay. Mr. Kim, would you like to share your perspective on
Yes.
the newly appointed Secretary of State?
Yes, I share the view of Ambassador Choi in the sense that the new administration will have so many issues that would take priority over North Korea issue. And then because of the lack of a clear solution or path, the American position would be basically reactive. What I mean by that is if there was a clear solution or some goal that is visible, then you could orient your policy towards proactive policy. But as Ambassador mentioned, there is no clear path. So it'll be more reactive, making sure by rhetoric and other gestures that North Korea doesn't go sort of out of control. But at the same time, basically taking a step back and take care of other more priority issues from U.S. perspective, such as dealing with the Middle East and ISIS and global terrorism. So it'll be sort of watch and see, but make sure, at least through the rhetoric and gestures and consolidating the Korea-U.S. alliance, that North Korea doesn't get out of bounds.
Ambassador Choi, one more question to you. Newly appointed U.S. Secretary of State will play a critical role in promoting the foreign policy toward North Korea. But the process has been delayed because of ongoing controversies. Who are the leading candidates for the position of the Secretary of State?
The reason why Trump is delaying the nomination of the Secretary of State is because of the hearing on Congress. If he would like to choose someone like alt-rightist, like Michael Flynn, that person may have a problem in the Congress for hearings. So he must choose somebody who can be accepted by Congress. That's why he is contacting Romney, Giuliani, other kind of persons. He's weighing his options. That's because of the hearing, because Secretary of State will have enormous impact on foreign policy of America, and the position of Congress becomes important.
Okay. Mr. Kim, there's been an outlook that the newly appointed Secretary of State will take a strong stance against North Korea, regardless of who is ultimately appointed. Why is that?
Well, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the main purpose of doing that is containing North Korea from getting out of control, because the United States does not need the headache to be generated by North Korea. So harsh rhetoric and stance and posture will be important to make sure U.S. is watching. U.S.-Korea alliance is very important, and the Peninsulan security is very important. So in fact, that's all that U.S. can do, because a lot of it is really up to the control of North and South. But in a way, by taking a bit of a hands-off approach, maybe I can use the analogy of taking the training wheels off South Korea in terms of taking initiative in terms of North-South relationship. You may remember in 1970s when Nixon declared the Guam Doctrine. It was a huge shock, withdrawing 20,000 troops from the peninsula. But the net effect long term has been very positive in my view, because you're forced to take your own defense into your own considerations and policy and responsibility. It created a very robust defense manufacturing industry. It also gave ownership to your self-defense issues here. So as long as that step is taken gradually in a coordinated manner between ROK and the US, then I think it'll be a long-term sanguine thing. And then, you know, the State Department's rhetoric vis-a-vis North itself is, as I mentioned earlier, it'll be making sure that you cannot go out of control. At the same time, ROK and US will continue to coordinate to make sure the alliance lasts.
Okay. Mr. Kim, continuously, how do you see the possibility of Washington-Pyongyang talks in the near future?
Well, the key words in your question was the near future. So as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that'll happen in the near future. Again, that'll have to be initiated by change in attitude on the part of the North, because, you know, unless things change dramatically, the nuclear option has to be on the table in terms of getting the any talk with the United States, unless the Trump administration changes that drastically, which I do not expect. But from the North's perspective, they want to get to the position of having bilateral relationship with U.S. and North Korea. That's like holy grail for them. But that's not going to be handed to them unless they take the nuclear option off the table. So there's sort of irreconcilable basic premise of any talk. So given all the other urgent issues on the part of the Trump administration around the world, including global terrorism, ISIS, Syria, and all these other things, I don't think there'll be any movement to sort of get the talk going, because it's just not that high of a priority in terms of getting things done.
Okay. Would you like to
on
share
North
your
Korea,
ideas?
Obama's position has been the strategic patience, which we will have to accept that it failed, because while Obama administration led North Korea in terms of waiting, we'll wait until you make a strategic decision and we'll take strategic patience. They failed because North Korea did everything they wanted to do. They did nuclear tests, they fired missiles over and over, and that cannot be continued in the future. But at the same time, Obama had huge Iranian issue to take care of. Now the Iranian issue is done, and Trump administration has time to concern about North Korea much better than Obama administration. But the huge problem that is not easy to deal with still remains. So there will be more concern on North Korea, but Trump administration must talk to China as well, because this is not Western alone problem. That is complex problem which concerns America, China, most of all South Korea. And there must be serious talk among three countries how to deal with the North Korean problem and find a common position regarding these intractable issues.
Okay. Mr. Kim, from November 17th to 19th, Korea sent a delegation of governmental officials to the U.S. to gauge the incoming administration's position on the alliance, and had a chance to meet Donald Trump's newly appointed National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn.
한미 동맹 관계는 우리에게 최우선 외교 안보 과제이기 때문에 인수팀이 발족한 초기부터 협력 관계를 좀 구축을 하자 하는 그런 목적을 가지고 왔습니다.
What kind of progress has been made during the visit?
Well, it's almost unrealistic to expect a concrete result out of that, what I call this sort of exploratory and introductory meeting to get to know the at least transition team. At the time, the national security and the cabinet lineup wasn't even completed and still not completed. So it was more, I would say, a psychological pacifier on the part of Korean government to make sure they have a line of communication that they're made aware of on the part of the U.S. government. But in fact, it's unrealistic to expect a concrete result to come out of it. But it is a good sign that through that open dialogue, the Trump team had to publicly acknowledge Korea-U.S. alliance being very, very important. So I think that in itself is a good affirmation of the basic, fundamental basis of the bilateral relationship. But in terms of concrete results, you'd have to kind of wait and see what really takes shape through next year.
I think on this point, Korean Chief Delegate Jo Tae-yong, Vice Secretary to the Defense Agency, is a very capable person, and he's one of the best we can produce as a diplomat. I think he must impress Michael Flynn on the importance of Korean question, North Korean question. Obama repeatedly said what is important for next president of the United States is Asia. His suggestion of pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia is not made out of blue. Obama acknowledged that the future of America depends on what's happening in Northeast Asia. And Korea is at the center of Northeast Asia. That configuration Trump could not avoid. He will, as a global leader, he realized over and over what's happening in this region is most important for his administration. On that point, I think Jo Tae-yong made sure that Michael Flynn pay more attention to this region, what is important for your president and for yourself. After this, he also must have impressed that to pay more attention to North Korean nuclear question. But on that, I can presume that Michael Flynn said, sure, that is most important, I will pay more attention, but when it comes to real concrete measures to take on North Korea, Trump team must think over and over to find the real approach, not reactive, but real approach to North Korea.
Okay. So the Michael Flynn can be a good strategic channel from South Korean government to the new Trump administration in the near future.
I think that's an excellent choice because he will make a very clear view on Islam terrorism and North Korea. He pointed out two problems, immediate problem for him after the meeting with Jo Tae-yong. So we'll leave with his strong position, Islam terrorism aside, because that really does not directly concern Korea. But on North Korea, his increased concern on North Korea is very important for us because we have to find a solution during next 4 years on North Korean nuclear question. Because we spoil these 4 years, then the real threat of North Korean nuclear missile question may come directly to American security. And that we cannot allow. Find a solution during the next 4 years on the progress of North Korean nuclear capability and missile technology.
Okay. Mr. Kim, Trump has unveiled plenty of plans for his first 100 days in office. And most of them are related to the domestic issues, including creation of jobs for American workers. Then some people have mentioned the possibility of the Trump administrations to put less importance to the North Korean nuclear issues. When do you think we will see the detailed policy direction of the U.S. policy toward the North Korea? And how have the North Korean issues been viewed by the Trump administration?
Yes, so I don't think it's an intentional lessening of they put on the importance of North Korea question. It's that other issues are more urgent, particularly domestic issues that need to be taken care of immediately, starting in January 21st, including Obamacare, job creation, trade, and other things. So it's not because of affirmative lessening of importance on North Korea issue, but other issues taking precedence. As Ambassador Chen mentioned, that this will eventually have to be dealt with in addition to the Middle East issues. But it will not be in the first 100 days, but it will have to be after the administration kind of takes shape and all the personalities and players are clear, and then regular channel of communication between Korea and the U.S. Has been established.
Okay.
On the 100 days first agenda was published very clearly by Trump on his speech he delivered on 22nd of October. That was less than 3 weeks before the election. It composed of 4 elements: immigration, terrorism, protectionism, and isolationism. That was the 4 agendas. And that is the order of the importance for Trump. And again, on these 4 points, I think Trump will pursue his policy on immigration and terrorism. And I presume that he will succeed on this point because this issue is shared by other Western countries. Brexit is one of the examples why British people voted against the European Union because of the immigration and terrorism point of view prevailed British people. So this common agenda must be pursued by Trump and his advisors, and they may record a success. On the other hand, protectionism and isolationism, on the agenda items, Korean issue is not directly linked. But on this point, as a global leader, Trump will have huge problem. He must accommodate to act as a global leader, not a national president.
Mm-hmm. Then what would be the major contents of the U.S. foreign policy toward the North that will be newly implemented by the incoming administration? How strong will it be?
On North?
In the North.
North Korea?
North Korea.
The most important analysis for the U.S. is what is the level of technology attained by miniaturization of a nuclear war component and the re-entry system of their missiles to arrive America. The 2 points, miniaturization and re-entry technology, North Korea have many years to advance on these 2 points. And that means Trump and his people may think they have some more years to focus on North Korea, saying that basically we may take the same position, strategic patience, like it or not, leaving this problem to China. And that is the danger facing us. They are engulfed with huge problems immediately focusing on their attention, then saying that they have several years to wait the missile and nuclear technology attach the critical importance, the tipping point, that may make America wait. But we cannot wait. These 4 years spent for nothing by our important allies. So the strategy and the vision must come from Korea, and for the solution.
Okay.
Korean president.
Mm-hmm. In response to the North's 5th nuclear test back in September, the US and China have finally reached an agreement on setting UN cap on North Korean coal exports. How is it different from UN Security Council Resolution 2270, which has been known as the strongest ever sanctions against Pyongyang?
The 2070 resolution was very important because it was so far the strongest. And the regime included many components regarding military actions, military capabilities. But one loophole left there was they didn't touch civilian trades. So that was a limit of the limit the 2070 can go. But now they realize that civilian control really is important to put real sanction on North Korea. So North Korea has a trade of limited size that is only $7 billion. In other words, North Korea exports around $3.5 billion. Coal is important. Coal takes about 1/3 of this portion. And 90% of the coal export is done with China. So total amount is $1 billion yearly. And if you can cap the export to China, that has a huge impact. In comparison, the gas industrial complex, we roughly imagine that we gave Kim Jong-il's pocket around $50 million per year. If we succeed with the new sanctions, we can cap 1/3 of the coal export to China, the amount will be around $300–400 million. That is 8 times more important as an industrial complex. The impact can be huge. And having said that, we have to accept that the sanctions really, in international practice, we have to accept that it does not really work as intended, because sanctions usually are targeted on military and other targeted areas that does not concern civilian trades. And civilian trades depends on China. China has a different perception from America. America's perception to North Korea is by design. They formulate an agreement and to resolve on time. China has a strategy of by default. They tender framework and let North Korea work within this framework to survive and perish. That is China's position. In other words, China will not perform the civilian trade with North Korea as expected by America. So America must accept this limited performance of sanctions on North Korea, including Security Council resolutions, and their clear limit must be accepted. One point important is the question of THAAD. We decide to deployment of THAAD. That will affect China's position on North Korea's coal sanction. And the diplomat said that was important vis-a-vis North Korean dissuasion of a North Korean attack. At the same time, we should not forget there is China-America component. In our calculation, it seems that we have completely forgotten America-China component. China is realizing this component is important for China's threat. They are applying many sanctions. Government do not want to be involved, but they are applying sanctions, including this core component. And in that sense, our treatment of that was limited application because we did not pay too much enough attention to China-America component in this equation.
Well, as Ambassador just mentioned, this adds to the pressure that already exists with the existing sanctions. So anything that deprives the North of the foreign exchange resources to develop the nuclear program and other hostile behavior is always helpful. Realistically, though, the challenge with sanctions, not just in North Korea but anywhere, is it can and does make life very, very difficult for the regime, but rarely make it impossible. That's really the challenge. So you see around the world how many regimes have lasted sanctions under dire circumstances. Yeah, it made life very, very difficult for the regime and the people, but the key is, does it really make that impossible? That's really the question, and that is really the challenge. And to make it work, ideally, it has to be combined with something that incentivize them to change their behavior. But again, we talked about that earlier in the program, because the North and the U.S. have totally different expectations as to what to start that incentive dialogue. But that's the challenge. So in a nutshell, yes, the additional sanctions will be helpful, but it really doesn't solve the problem because it never makes life impossible.
Okay. Nikki Haley was chosen to serve as a U.S. ambassador to UN. It has made a lot of headlines as she's a daughter of immigrants from India and also was a critic of Trump during the election campaign. There's been a growing need for Korea to closely cooperate this new ambassador as well. What is your outlook for her future moves?
So Nikki Haley supported in the beginning Marco Rubio. Then Rubio declined. I decided to quit. Then she supported Ted Cruz. But she voted for Trump. He said, after two candidates gone, he said, I'll support Trump. He voted for Trump. So the fact that she criticized Trump in the early days of the election should not count. And it's an honor for her to become one of the two so far female cabinet member and serve as U.S. representative to the United Nations. I happened to serve 2.5 years as a Korean representative to the United Nations. And the U.S. counterpart I have to deal with was John Bolton. Despite all the rumors regarding John Bolton, I had the most pleasant and cooperative relationship with John Bolton, and we didn't have any, to my mind, serious problem with him. That is because the real problem John Bolton had to deal with in U.S. United Nations framework is not Korea. It's P5. In other words, China in terms of North Korea. And South Korea is always taking position which is accommodatable to the United States than China does. So Korea is in a way to talk to American representative Nikki Haley this time and China representative and talk to them to find a solution which is can be accepted of the Korean interest. So Korean representative should welcome Nikki Haley, and he or she can have an excellent cooperative relationship with American representative of the United Nations.
Okay. What is your outlook for the Nikki Haley?
Yeah, so let me take the sort of view without the context of Korean relationship, just looking at Nikki Haley in the American government and global context. She is not a diehard ideologue, unlike some of the other people mentioned during the campaign and transition. She forcefully took down the Confederate flag from the Capitol building of South Carolina after the massacre of blacks at a church in South Carolina. In fact, where one of the pastors that were killed was a personal friend of hers. Not that that was the sole reason she took the bold step, bold in the sense of South Carolina, that is, to take down the Confederate flag from the state capitol. She was critical of Trump regarding his racist, sexist remarks, but she was never really in any mode of condemnation of Trump. So she could work with it. And also, you have to put this in perspective from her political life. She is a relative newcomer to the Republican political scene, and she is often referred to as one of the future leaders of the Republican Party. So she is, from her perspective, very clever to be sort of jumping on the bandwagon of Trump and make sure her political life is on the good side for the long term.
Okay.
But she's a blank page in terms of foreign policy experience. But I think she'll be willing to learn and adapt, as exhibited by her other issues related behavior. So this is why the Secretary of State and other national security advisors will be very, very important in terms of coaching Nikki Haley, because she will be receptive to and learning from these other more senior leaders in this area.
Okay. Please let me hear your final remarks, respectively, on these questions. Considering the potential composition of the Trump cabinet, what kind of security strategy are needed for Korea?
Well, I'll put it very simply. For now, we would assume no abrupt change in Korea-U.S. alliance and mutual defense positions. I think Ambassador Lippert recently reaffirmed, regardless of who gets to be in the Trump administration, he was convinced and absolutely sure that the U.S.-Korea alliance will continue very strong, and I truly believe that, regardless of who is in charge. So we have to take the wait-and-see approach as to how the Trump administration personnel settle down in the next few months. And long-term, Korea needs to prepare for taking on more financial and strategic burden in terms of self-defense as well as regional security. As I mentioned earlier, that is not necessarily a bad thing if managed and coordinated closely between the United States and Korea in an orderly manner.
Okay. Ambassador Choi?
I think that is one of the most important questions we are raising until this moment, because so far we looked into America. What kind of a personal composition, cabinet advisors Donald Trump, which is important. But as Sun Tzu said in his Art of War, what is important is knowing us also. If you know your enemy or your counterpart and know yourself, there will be no danger. Do we know ourselves? That is the problem I'd like to question this time. In a way, Korea's diplomacy until now, for last 6 centuries, has been unipolar diplomacy. In other words, for Joseon's Lee dynasty, 5 centuries, Korea did not have diplomacy. It belonged to Chong dynasty, China. So it was unilateral approach. We meet Chinese people, then appeal to them, persuade them. That was only course of action open to us. After that, half a century belonged to Japan. Korea didn't have diplomacy at all. And after that half a century, since the Korean War, we depended on America. So it was another unilateral diplomacy. That is why still we focus on who will be Secretary of State, who will be Secretary of Defense, who will be National Security Advisor. Important, but we have to know them, we have to know ourselves as well. But now, beginning next president, we have to focus almost as important who will be our counterpart, know ourselves. In other words, we have to establish philosophy and strategy in our diplomacy, how to deal with Donald Trump idea. So we must pay much attention to Trump's idea on diplomacy as he laid out in April, America First policy. There are all sorts of Trump ideas on American foreign policy. That is Trump's framework he will give to his personnel advisors. They will work in this framework. Another point is October 22nd, Gettysburg speech, he laid out first 10 days, 100 days implementative executive orders. We have to look into this and establish our strategy and philosophy first. And beginning next president, we have to have multipolar approach, not unipolar approach. That means we have to consider American, Chinese, North Korean, Japanese position regarding Korean Peninsula. Then we have to establish multipolar approach from now on. The approach so far we relied on, like appealing, persuasion, must have limited approach. We have to accept that. Strategy and philosophy must support our foreign policy guideline in the future.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your opinions today.